Welcome to What's Up over Edmonton for September 2024. My name is Jeff Robertson, and I'm a member of the Royal Astronomical Society Edmonton Centre. And this picture here is something put together by one of our members, Luca Van Zella, who is looking 20 years into the future to August 22nd, 2044 at 7:35 in the evening, when Edmonton will see a total eclipse of the sun. And this would be the view if you were standing by the hill by McNally High School looking over the river, and that's the Dawson Bridge down below. I called it What's Up over Edmonton because the skies in Edmonton are fundamentally different here at 53 degrees north latitude than what are presented in many of the popular astronomy publications like Sky and Telescope, Astronomy Magazine, or what is shown on the Weather Channel and the CBC. And the example I always use is this constellation here, Scorpio, here in Toronto on July the 5th at 11 o'clock. Scorpio is well and truly above the horizon. The entire constellation is there from head to stinger. While in Edmonton on that same day, we only see the top of that constellation. We never see the whole thing. We never see the stinger. And it's not only what we can see in Edmonton, but how we see it. And so this is a picture I took in February 2023 of the moon in the upper left, Jupiter in the center, and Venus in the lower right. You can see they're on a bit of an angle. And on that same night in Buenos Aires, Mexico, my wife's cousin took a picture of the same scene with the moon at the top, Jupiter in the middle, Venus at the bottom, and they're in a straight line down to the horizon because the ecliptic rises that much higher down there. Most of the information I use comes from the Observer's Handbook, which is put out by the RASC every year. It is 352 pages of just about anything the observational astronomer would want to know. So, the sky in September, all at once, summer collapsed into fall, although right now it doesn't feel like that. It's still pretty warm out there. So thank you, Mr. Wild. So what do we have in September? We have Saturn and Neptune reaching opposition. We have zodiacal light in the morning sky for the first couple weeks. We have the autumnal equinox on September the 22nd, the astronomical beginning of fall. And Mercury is riding low in the southeast morning sky early in the month. And we have a partial lunar eclipse on September 17th, and I've got, is it worth seeing? Well, we'll see. So I will start what I call the planetarium portion of this presentation, and as always, it is pre-recorded. Now, because I went on vacation in the middle of August, a lot of this recording was done in the first and second week of August. Some here and some I took my laptop with me on vacation, so the sound may sound a little bit different. And I put in a little bit of a surprise at the last minute yesterday when I was reading something, so we'll just go with that. Let's look at what we can see in the skies over Edmonton for the month of September 2024. And as always, we'll start with sunrise and sunset times. So on September the 1st, the sun rose at 6:44 a.m. It set at 8:21 p.m. for 13 hours and 37 minutes of daylight. Night begins, that is, astronomical twilight ends at 10:34 p.m. On the 30th of September, the sun will rise at 7:35 a.m. It will set at 7:11 p.m. for 11 hours and 36 minutes of daylight. Astronomical twilight ends at 9:08 p.m. Looking at planets in the evening sky, we'll start with Venus. Venus is still riding very, very low half an hour after sunset, as this view shows. It does shine fairly bright at magnitude minus 3.9, so it's a really bright object. It'll look like an airplane if you can spot it in the deep twilight, and this view is half an hour after sunset. If you do get to see it in a telescope, it will be a waning gibbous phase. At the beginning of the month, Venus sets at 9:04. Keep in mind the sun sets at 8:21. By the end of the month, Venus is setting at 8:01, about an hour after the sun. So it's still going to ride very low in the sky. And as this chart shows, Venus will continue to ride fairly low for the next month or so. You're really going to start noticing it in the evening twilight around November. And by the end of November, it will be pretty high up in the sky once it gets dark. Also in the evening sky is Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus by the time we begin September. So let's look at Saturn first. Saturn rises at 8:41 at the beginning of the month. It rises at 6:40 at the end of the month. It reaches opposition on September the 8th. And as I've mentioned many times before, when a planet reaches opposition, it means that the Sun, the Earth, and the planet are all in a line, and the planet rises as the Sun is setting. So Saturn is a nice object in a telescope, although the rings are getting thinner and will completely disappear in March of 2025 as the planet tilts edge on to us on its axis as it orbits the Sun. But not to worry, the rings will return as the planet continues to move in its orbit, and the rings will start to open up again. Moving down the ecliptic, we come to Neptune. At the beginning of the month, Neptune rises at 8:54, just a few minutes behind Saturn. By the end of the month, it will be rising at 6:55. And like Saturn, it also reaches opposition in September. It reaches opposition on September the 21st. Neptune is a telescopic object, and it presents this lovely blue disk. And the last of the evening planets is Uranus. Uranus, with its greeny blue, almost turquoise-ish disk, rises at 10:33 at the beginning of the month and 8:34 at the end of the month. Next to rise will be Jupiter. Jupiter rises at the beginning of the month at 11:43. I didn't include it in the evening because it was just too close to midnight at the beginning of the month. By the end of the month, it's rising at 9:57. And through a telescope, you can see the equatorial bands, and you can also see the 4 big Galilean moons. And in this particular view, I've got all 4 of the moons on the same side of Jupiter. You can see them all here in this little clump. And of course, day to day, they change positions. And finally, we come to Mars, which has zipped through the constellation Taurus and has entered the constellation Gemini. I hope you got to see the nice conjunction of Jupiter and Mars in the middle of August. And through a telescope, Mars will show a slightly gibbous phase. The color will look kind of an orangey brown color, and you may be able to start seeing some surface features on Mars. Mars will begin its retrograde motion later on in the year as it gets closer to opposition, which occurs in January. Mercury is a target in the eastern sky at the beginning of the month. This is a view of Mercury on September the 5th, and on that day it rises at 5:06 a.m. So this is a view about 45 minutes before the sun comes up. If you look at Mercury through a telescope, and you will need a clear view of the eastern northeastern horizon, Mercury will present itself as a half phase, because Mercury, like Venus, does go through phases. By the end of the month, Mercury is in conjunction with the Sun and is not visible at all. Let's look at where the Moon is in relationship to the planets. So, on the evening of the 16th, it is approaching Saturn. On the early morning of the 17th, there is something going on between the Moon and Saturn, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. On the evening of the 17th, it is near Neptune. On the 21st, it is near the Pleiades and above Uranus. On the 23rd, it is passing Jupiter. And on the 24th and 25th, it is passing Mars. Staying with the moon for just a few minutes, the full moon closest to the autumnal equinox is known as the harvest moon. Now, near the time of the autumnal equinox, the angle of the moon's orbit relative to Earth's horizon is at its minimum, and this causes the full moon to rise above the horizon much faster than usual. Since the difference of the moon's rising time on successive night barely varies, the moon appears to rise at nearly the same hour for several nights in succession. Here is the moon on September the 15th, 2 days before full. It rises in Edmonton at 7:21 p.m. On the 16th, it rises at 7:34 p.m. On the 17th, the day of full moon, it rises at 7:44. And on the 18th, it's rising at 7:54. So instead of the usual 45 to 50 minute interval between the rising of the moon on successive days around the autumnal equinox, in Edmonton at least, the interval is 10 minutes. And speaking of the autumnal equinox, that occurs on September 22nd at 6:43 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. This is where the Earth is in a position in its orbit. Northern and southern hemisphere receive equal amounts of sunlight, and days are 12 hours long, nights are 12 hours long as well. Around the fall equinox, we lose about 4 or 5 minutes of daylight every day. Contrast that with the summer solstice when we were losing seconds per day. On the 17th of September, the moon is full, and there is also a partial lunar eclipse. The moon will rise at 7:44 p.m., and the eclipse will already have started. It will be in the penumbra of the Earth's shadow. That is the outer part of the shadow. So it's going to be kind of a dusky appearance. The moon enters the umbra, the darkest part of the Earth's shadow, at 8:12. But it's not going to go very far into the shadow. It's only going to cover a very small part of the top of the moon. The greatest eclipse is at 8:44, and then the moon leaves the umbra of the Earth at 9:16, and eventually it leaves the penumbra at 10:47, and the eclipse is over. Now, this full moon will also happen very close to when the moon is at perigee, its closest point to the Earth in its orbit. So I'm sure you'll see reports of supermoon eclipse or something like that. Now, I did say that I'd have more to say about Saturn and the moon, and there's more going on the morning of the 17th. The moon will occult Saturn. It will pass in front of it. And the occultation happens early in the morning. Saturn passes behind the moon from Edmonton at 5:14 a.m. and then reemerges again at 5:52 a.m. As I've shown here, the moon is very low on the horizon. When the occultation begins, it's only 9 degrees above the horizon, and by 5:52 it's even lower. If you have a clear view of the moon, you can watch the occultation of Saturn. Although I'm going to make a weather report right now, I'm sure this is what it's going to look like. For the first couple weeks in September, you can catch the zodiacal light in the eastern sky just before sunrise. This is sunlight shining off dust along the ecliptic of the solar system. This is leftover material from the formation of the solar system. Let's look briefly at a few things we can see in the night sky in September. September with longer nights, and the temperatures are still not too bad. So if we look toward the north, we see Ursa Major and its famous asterism, the Big Dipper, probably one of the most recognized star patterns in the sky. Got a couple galaxies here. In its vicinity, there is the Whirlpool Galaxy M51, Just zoom in on that. There it is there. It is a telescopic object. Most of this stuff I'm going to talk about are telescopic objects. So it's a lovely galaxy, about 37 million light years from Earth. And you can find it below the end of the handle on the Big Dipper. Above the handle, we have M101, the Pinwheel Galaxy. And it is a spiral galaxy like our own Milky Way, about 27 million light years from Earth. If you follow the arc of the handle, you come to Arcturus, which is a red giant star, one of the brightest stars in the northern hemisphere. And it's about 37 light years from Earth. Moving into the southern sky, there is a plethora of deep sky objects. Unfortunately, some of them are quite low, and you need a very clear horizon to see them without a lot of dust and cloud in the way to obscure them. However, if the skies are clear, you have some pretty good views. For example, there is the Trifid Nebula, or M20. It's about 5,200 light years from Earth. Lovely view in a telescope. Immediately below that is M8, the Lagoon Nebula, about 5,100 light years from Earth. And above that is the Eagle Nebula, M16. Looking straight up, we see very close to the zenith Deneb, one of the points of the summer triangle. The other two stars in the triangle are Vega and Altair. Vega here, Altair there. Vega in the constellation of Lyra, Altair in the constellation of Aquila the Eagle. I think I talked about things inside the summer triangle last month, so I will just skip past all that. And fall is a good time to look at the Andromeda Galaxy. You follow these two stars in the constellation Andromeda, and they point directly at this magnificent spiral galaxy located 2.5 million light years from Earth. Just a reminder, the sun is very active. Keep an eye out for aurora. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to aurorawatch.ca to get updates on your phone when aurora are possible. Also, on September the 14th is International Observe the Moon Night. Hopefully we'll have clear skies and we will be open at the observatory in Coronation Park outside the TELUS World of Science with telescopes set up, and hopefully we'll have a few extra telescopes out on the lawn or even on the hill behind the observatory, depending on how low the moon is that day. I think that's about it. If I've missed something, I apologize. I've recorded this before I went on vacation.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
There is a possibility of a naked-eye comet in our skies from the end of September until early October. Comet C 2023 A3 Atlas was spotted in February 2023. At the time, it was an 18th magnitude object. When calculated, its orbit was found to pass close to both the Sun and the Earth in September and October of 2024. The comet has an orbital period of 80,000 years. By the end of September 2024, it will be a morning object, perhaps shining as brightly as magnitude plus 0.6, but rising just before the Sun. Comet C 2023 A3 will reach perihelion, the closest point to the Sun in its orbit, on September 28th. If the comet survives perihelion, the best views of the comet will come when it moves into the evening sky, around October 10th. It passes closest to the Earth, some 70 million kilometers away, on October the 12th. At the time, the comet may reach magnitude -3, brighter than Jupiter. However, as Canadian comet hunter David Levy has said, Comets are like cats. They have tails and do whatever they like. So, whether this comet will be a naked eye wonder like Neowise was in 2020, or break apart like ISON in 2013, remains to be seen. We now return you to our regular program. With that, I'll say, are there any questions? Okay. Any questions, comments, Rotten Tomatoes?
Very nice. Very well done. It's the first time I've seen one of these. Nice work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, and I think Tom recognized that I almost slipped into Walter Winchell mode there, but I
I
didn't.
was hoping.
Okay. All right. We'll move on to the moon.
What do you see when you look at the moon? When it's full and round, do you see a balloon? Does it look like a cookie with the bite taken out? What do you see when you look at the moon? It follows a path.
Okay, the moon was new on the 2nd of September. It reaches first quarter on September 11th. The moon is full on the 17th. It's also the night of the eclipse. And the full moon in September is known as the harvest moon. Also has other names: the moose calling moon, the corn moon, the song moon. I don't know why. Song, oh well. Or the barley moon. Most of those referring to crops or mating of animals. And third quarter is on September the 24th. Now, I normally pick out a feature out of the list in the RASC Explore the Moon certificate programs for either telescope or binoculars, and today is something from the telescope program. So we're going to go to the ancient southern lunar highlands for this feature, specifically in this area here in one of my so-so images. And in this enlargement, we have a couple items I've featured before. A young lunar feature, which is Tycho, and an old lunar feature, the crater Clavius. Both of these craters were prominent in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. And this month's feature does not have that sort of notoriety. It is the crater Longomontanus. And there it is here. So this is the best picture I have of the crater. The sun had just risen on it, so it's still in pretty deep shadow, but I was actually, in all fairness, I was trying to image Clavius, which is the one in the center of the picture. It's best seen on lunar days 9 and 10, and the crater is located in the southern highlands to the southwest of the bright ray crater Tycho. While Tycho is thought to be around 100 million years old, Longomontanus was formed about 3.9 billion years ago. It's 145 kilometers wide and 4.5 kilometers deep. The walls of the crater have been heavily battered over the eons by later impacts, and you can see those in this image here. And this is not one of my images. This one's taken by someone who knows what they're doing. When the moon is full, ray material, ejecta thrown out from the impact that formed the crater Tycho, can be seen crossing the floor of this crater. This image taken from Earth shows the crater to be slightly oval shaped, but this is due to foreshortening because of its location. The crater is actually quite circular. And as seen from this image from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, the floor is fairly flat, with a cluster of low peaks just offset from the center. The crater was named after Christian Sorensen Longomontanus, a Danish astronomer, and he was an assistant to Tycho Brahe for 8 years, beginning in 1589 at Brahe's Astronomical Observatory in Uranienborg. He died in 1647 but continued to support Brahe throughout his life. Now, I've been using the RESC Explore the Universe program as a rough guide for the past year or so. And as September marks the end of summer, I'm taking a constellation from the program's list of summer constellations. So this month, it is Capricornus, or simply Capricorn. And this is the star field. This is an astronomical drawing of the constellation there in the center, that triangular shaped thing. And I can't say I've ever seen one. I've seen mountain goats and pygmy goats, goat cheese, but I've never seen a sea goat. So what exactly is a sea goat? We have to go to Greek mythology once again. In Greek mythology, the constellation is identified as the goat that suckled the infant Zeus after his mother Rhea saved him from being devoured by his father Cronus. So, okay, so it's not just political parties that eat their own. Greek gods do it as well. Capricornus is one of the 48 constellations listed by the 2nd century astronomer Ptolemy. Capricorn is one of the 13 constellations that lie along the ecliptic. That's that green line in this image. And thus is one of the constellations of the zodiac. It's located between Sagittarius on the right and Aquarius on the left. In terms of sky area, it is the smallest constellation in the zodiac. It's a faint constellation with only one star above magnitude 3, Deneb Elgida. It's a magnitude 2.9 star located 39 light years from Earth. Its name, Deneb Elgida, is Arabic for tail of the goat. And you can see that star located with the arrow pointing at it at the tail of the goat. The next brightest star in the constellation is Elgida, and it is a yellow-hued giant star of a magnitude 3.6, accompanied by a yellow-hued supergiant star magnitude 4.3. There it is there. Folks with good eyesight can split the two without optical aid, and there it is circled there. Capricorn contains one Messier object, M30, a globular cluster some 30,000 light years distance, containing thousands of stars, and it shines at magnitude 7.1, so it is a telescopic object. And here is a photo of the globular cluster M30. That's all I have on Capricorn. We'll go to space history. And this is where we look at a past event that not only occurred in this month, but whose anniversary year is divisible by 5. So in 2024, we look at events in years ending in 4 or 9. Now, for this month, we'll look at something close to home, that is, not too far from the ground, but would echo many years into the future and whose influence led to the design of the space shuttle. Now, normally I do this segment as part of a PowerPoint, but I put it together and I felt it didn't really flow very well. So as I did a couple months ago, this month's history segment is a video. So here we go. British Aviation produced the Supermarine Spitfire, a beautiful aircraft. But they also produced the Fairey Gannet, the Blackburn R1, and the Bristol Freighter, all extremely butt-ugly airplanes. France produced the Mirage 2000, but they also produced the Farman F-120. The United States produced probably the best fighter of World War II, the North American P-51. But they've also produced the Boeing X-32. In terms of aircraft looks, I think the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter has got to be the prettiest airplane ever made. But there is one other aircraft that I really admire just because of its looks, and that's the North American X-15 rocket plane, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The X-15, X for experimental, was designed to explore flight characteristics at hypersonic speeds, as well as at extremely high altitudes. Earlier X-planes, like the X-1, had been the first to have flown faster than Mach 1 in level flight, the X-2 over Mach 3. The X-15 would fly even faster and higher, sometimes crossing the Kármán line and entering space. 3 X-15s were built. Tail numbers 666, 70, 71, and 72. It carried a single pilot. They were 50 feet long, stood 13 feet tall at the tail, and had a wingspan of 22 feet. They weighed 11,374 pounds empty and 31,275 pounds fully fueled. It had the standard aircraft control surfaces for when it was at lower altitudes, but it also had reaction control jets for when the air was too thin for ailerons and rudder to function. For the first 24 flights, it was powered by twin XLR-11 rocket engines, the same engine that powered the X-1. The motors burned a mixture of liquid oxygen and alcohol and generated 16,000 pounds of thrust. All subsequent flights used the XLR-99 engine, which burned anhydrous ammonia and liquid oxygen, producing 57,000 pounds of thrust. During an X-15 flight, the engine would fire until the fuel was exhausted, then the craft would glide back to a landing. The X-15 had a front nose wheel and twin landing skids at its tail. All flights originated from Edwards Air Force Base in California. As Edwards was on a dry lake bed, it gave the X-15 lots of room for landing. The X-15, like the X-1 and X-2, were air-launched. In the case of the X-15, it was carried under the wing of a B-52 bomber. It was carried to a height of 45,000 feet and released. Following release, the pilot would light the engine and fly the mission profile. Flights typically lasted from 10 to 12 minutes from release to touchdown. Research gained from the X-15 program was used when designing the space shuttle. The X-15 made its first powered flight 65 years ago this month, on September 17, 1959. 12 pilots flew the X-15. X-15 number 1, tail number 66670, flew 81 times. X-15 number 2, tail number 66671, flew 53 times, and number 3, 66672, flew 65 times. X-15 number 2 had an interesting history. In a November 1962 flight, it had its engine cut out early, with 70% of its fuel still on board. Landing heavy, one of the rear skids collapsed. The craft flipped, injuring the pilot and badly damaging the airframe. The ship was repaired and modified, adding 2 feet to its length and giving it the ability to carry external fuel tanks. Rechristened the X-15A2, it was this craft that went on to set a speed record that still stands today. To do this, the X-15 was covered in a pink ablative coating to protect it from the extreme heat that speed would generate, then coated with a white heat-resistant paint, because no pilot wants to fly a pink airplane. On October 3, 1967, piloted by Pete Knight, this X-15 reached the speed of Mach 6.7, or 7,274 kilometers per hour. With an experimental aircraft, accidents happen, and in November of 1967, Mike Adams was killed when X-15 number 3 went out of control and crashed. The Fédération Aéronautique Internationale recognizes that space begins at 100 kilometers, or 62 miles. On August 22, 1963, pilot Joe Walker flew the X-15 number 1 to a height of 110 kilometers, or 67 miles, officially becoming an astronaut. He was the only X-15 pilot to reach this internationally recognized height. However, the U.S. Air Force recognizes the beginning of space as 50 miles, or 80 kilometers. 8 of the 12 X-15 pilots earned USAF astronaut wings. X-15 flights tested all sorts of aeronautical research. They also carried science experiments, some for astronomy, some for micrometeorite collection. They tested materials in installation that were later used on space missions, and physiology tests on the pilots themselves. On October 24th, 1968, the X-15 made its 199th and final flight. X-15 number 1 is in the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. X-15A2 is in the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. The X-15 was an iconic machine at the time. There was a movie starring Charles Bronson about it, and an episode of The Outer Limits that scared the hell out of 9-year-old me. And I built a model of it a few times over the years. Little green screen work in this picture. A couple of X-15 pilots moved on to higher callings. Joe Engel commanded 2 space shuttle flights, and Neil Armstrong, you might have heard of him, took a small step some years back. A show I liked when I was a kid was Fireball XL5. The lyrics of the closing theme began, "I wish I was a spaceman, the fastest guy alive." That song could have been about the pilots of the X-15. So I always reference Heavens Above. It's a great source of information. You can print star charts, you can look up satellite timings, and you can look for comet finder charts. This comet at the end of this month and beginning of October, that would be a good place to print a finder chart to go and look for this comet. I'll also mention, actually, I'll just finish up here. The next What's Up is on Wednesday, October the 2nd at 7:30 p.m. The next meeting of the RASC Edmonton Center will be on Monday, September the 9th. You can attend in person. It's in the Ziegler Dome in the TELUS World of Science, or you can attend via Zoom. The link will be on our webpage, edmontonrasc.com. I'll also mention that right now, the Northern Prairie Star Party is going on. It's an annual thing, and there are details on our website if you want to check that out as well. And with that, I will say thank you for your attention. If there's any questions or comments, you can unmute yourself and say them now.
Hey, Jeff, wasn't there a movie called Capricorn?
Capricorn 1?
Capricorn 1, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of those, well, it
So-
was a fake moon. Well, actually, they went to Mars. Fake Mars landing movie. It was in the 70s. You know, has a great soundtrack, and it's well acted.
Yeah.
And it has, even has O.J. Simpson in it.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, my parents took me grew up in Kamloops, BC, and my
Oh, yeah.
parents took me to the movie theater. And the line that I remember from that movie is that one of the pilots or one of the astronauts comes along and he escapes from something. All of a sudden, he looks at this great big sand wall that he has to climb, sandstone wall. He goes, "Piece of cake." He had to
Oh,
climb.
yeah.
Yeah, that's my one memory of that movie. But yeah,
Yeah, it's it's an okay movie. I mean, I've got it in my DVD collection, and I look at it every now and again. But the hardware they used was just old Apollo hardware. Because budgets are cheap. An Apollo lunar module would never survive landing on Mars. It would burn up on the way in. So, but anyway, yeah, whatever.
the other question I got is F-104 jet.
Yeah, Starfighter.
Starfighter. Is that what they have? There's one at Cold Lake on, what is that jet at Cold Lake that's near their community center or their Kinsman office?
Maybe. I've never been to Cold Lake. But they might have one on a pole. They do have one on a pole outside the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton. And there's one at the Air Museum here in Edmonton. They have one, but it's not on a pole. It's inside.
Inside, okay.
The guy on the pole there is a Voodoo, an F-101 Voodoo, and they also have a Norseman on a pole, a bush plane.
Right.
Well, and they have a Beaumark missile outside too. So
Oh well.
So Jeff, another movie which featured the X-15 was The Right Stuff. And
no, it was never in The Right Stuff. That was the X1.
what was the X1, right?
Yeah, the orange one. Yeah, and they also used the X1A. They
There's
did
that
use
scene of Sam Shepard encountering the X1 as it's smoking away and he's riding his horse around it.
yeah,
Yeah, it was an X1. Okay.
yeah, and they did use an X-15 in First Man too. That's the opening scene. So, but no, I remember that Twilight Zone episode. Well, not Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, and I only watched a few episodes, and all of them just scared the hell out of me. So,
Yep.
but that was just
You couldn't adjust your set, remember?
no, you couldn't adjust your set. No,
On the opening scenes for the $6 Million Man, was that an X1 that Lee Majors crashed?
no, that was
Steve Austin?
no, that was what the heck was that called? An M2 F2 or something like that. It was an experimental lifting body. That is, it doesn't have wings. The body itself was the wing, right? And that was the pilot in that crash actually wasn't even injured. He had a few bumps and bruises, but he didn't lose, his legs and one arm and an eye. So,
And here and one ear. Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah. Oh, did he have the ear? Oh no, it was Jamie Summers had the ear.
Oh, she had the hearing. Right. Yeah. It's like no. Yeah, that's when he ran. That's what the
Yeah, and it goes whenever he would do something. So in slow motion. Yeah.
Okay,
Anyway, Jeff, very good. Sorry, guys, I gotta go, but Jeff, great job as usual.
Okay. This
Very
has been
admirable.
yeah. Okay. Thanks, Tom. This is being recorded, and I will clean up some of the boo boos and stick it on YouTube in a day or two.
Right, see you later.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. So, is there anything else?
No, that was very interesting. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's always nice to see a new face.
How does one join the RASC? I've been kind of like attending some of these virtual things a few times over the years, and popped out to Tofield once at the invite of a member.
Oh yeah. On our website somewhere there is a join, and it'll take you to the national site. You have to join through the national site
Okay.
and then put your affiliation to Edmonton. I presume you want to affiliate with Edmonton and send them money.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And if you put the affiliation to Edmonton, we get some of that money back to our center. So,
Okay. Excellent. All right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of the evening. It looks pretty nice
and it's
there.
nice. It's nice and clear. I'll be setting up my my scope on the upper deck.
Excellent.
Okay. Thanks
Okay.
again.
well done again, Jeff. Love
All
it.
right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Yeah. Good night. We'll see you guys next month, maybe. Okay. And